Mastering gluten-free flour blends is an educational deep dive into the science of texture. Today, we use a sophisticated...
Doesn't come from some rare, incredibly expensive grain, but actually from a splash of pungent apple cider vinegar.
Right. And a centuries-old Japanese milk bread technique.
Yes.
Yes.
Which, I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds wild. But that is exactly where the cutting edge of modern baking has taken us. We've essentially just completely rewritten the rules of food science.
And it is about time, honestly, because if you look back just, a decade or two, gluten-free baking was firmly stuck in the dark ages.
Oh, the dark ages. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I am talking about a bleak, heavy era. You'd go to a bakery, ask for the gluten-free option, and they'd hand you a muffin that would just instantly crumble into a pile of sad dust if you, looked at it too hard.
Or worse, a loaf of bread that was so incredibly dense you could legitimately use it as a doorstop.
Exactly. A literal brick.
Yeah, it was an exercise in pure survival back then. People weren't eating those early baked goods for pleasure, They were eating them because the alternative was violent illness.
Right.
The reigning culinary expectation was just that, if you removed gluten, you just had to accept a fundamentally inferior, frankly unpleasant experience.
But then you look at the culinary landscape today, and it is a completely different universe.
Night and day.
We have gluten-free baked goods that aren't just passable, they are absolutely stunning. They're flavorful, they have that perfect airy crumb, and in so many cases, they are entirely indistinguishable from their gluten-filled counterparts.
The evolution is staggering. We've moved from sheer desperation to actual intentional culinary artistry.
Which is exactly what we are here to explore. Welcome to this deep dive into gluten-free baking, from challenge to triumph.
I love that title.
Right, it fits perfectly. Today's mission is custom tailored for you, the intermediate baker. You already know the basics, wheat flour's out, you know what cross-contamination is.
We got the foundations down.
Exactly. But today, we are going to extract the ultimate nuggets of knowledge from our sources, the deep science and the mechanical truths that will elevate your skills from simply surviving without gluten to absolute triumph in the kitchen. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to truly grasp how we engineer these modern marvels, we really have to look at the historical hurdle bakers were trying to overcome. Because the massive demand for these alternative foods didn't just, appear out of nowhere.
Right, this wasn't a sudden culinary fad born in some test kitchen.
Not at all. The history here is rooted deeply in a medical mystery. If you look at the work of a mid-20th century Dutch pediatrician named Willem-Karel Dicke, you start to see the puzzle pieces finally come together.
Okay, so what did he find?
Well, the symptoms of what we now know as celiac disease, this severe systemic autoimmune reaction, they've actually been documented in medical texts dating all the way back to ancient times.
Wait, really? Ancient times?
Yeah, ancient times. But it took until Dr. Dicke's research in the 1950s to definitively connect those devastating symptoms directly to the consumption of gluten.
Okay, I have to push back on that timeline for a second, because that seems like a massive historical gap.
It is.
If the symptoms were known since ancient times, why did it take thousands of years, all the way to the mid-20th century, to finally crack the code?
It's a fair question. It really comes down to the sheer complexity of the human diet. For centuries, people were consuming such a vast, rotating variety of grains, proteins, and agricultural products.
So it was just too much noise in the data.
Exactly. Isolating one specific microscopic protein matrix, gluten, as the single biological culprit was like looking for a needle in a global haystack.
Wow.
It actually took the tragic, unique circumstances of World War II, specifically the severe bread shortages in the Netherlands, for Dicke to observe a pattern.
Oh, because they didn't have access to wheat.
Right. His patients' severe gastrointestinal symptoms rapidly improved when wheat was scarce, and then immediately relapsed when Allied planes finally dropped wheat flour into the country and bread became available again.
That is incredible. A war-induced shortage accidentally isolates the variable.
Yep. Science in the real world.
So Dicke solved the medical mystery. He proved gluten was the enemy. But by removing it, he accidentally created a massive architectural crisis for bakers.
He really did.
Because, how do you bake without the literal glue that holds bread together? I always think of those early Dark Age attempts at gluten-free baking, like trying to build a house without any mortar.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. They had the bricks, the alternative grains, but they were just stacking them up using naive one-to-one substitutions for regular flour.
And that's the trap most early bakers fell into. They treated gluten simply as a flavor profile to be swapped, rather than a structural mechanical necessity.
Which is why everything fell apart.
Exactly. Without the gluten network to trap expanding gases, everything just collapsed. But over the decades, the cultural movement shifted. Initially, a gluten-free diet was a strict, punitive medical restriction.
Just for survival.
Right. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, as awareness grew, and as food scientists began to actually decode the architecture of alternative flours, it transitioned into a broader lifestyle choice.
Yeah. Today, people use it to reduce systemic inflammation or just to explore a much more diverse, complex culinary landscape beyond basic wheat.
Absolutely.
Now that we've explored the past, let's dive into the ingredients that actually make this modern mortar work. We are no longer just scooping flour, we are engineering a dough from scratch.
We were playing chemist.
Yes. And from everything I'm reading in the source material, the best way to visualize this engineering is to think about mixing concrete.
I like where this is going. Walk me through it.
Okay, so in a good batch of concrete, you need three things. You need the aggregate, the bulk, the gravel, and the sand that takes up space.
Right.
You need the cement, the fine powder that fills the tiny gaps and binds things together. And you need the rebar, the flexible steel rods that provide tensile strength so the whole structure doesn't just snap in half under pressure.
That is spot on.
In gluten-free baking, those three elements are your flours, your starches, and your gums.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. Let's break those structural categories down, starting with your aggregate, the flours.
Okay.
In the gluten-free matrix, flours provide your bulk and flavor, but they behave radically differently from one another at a chemical level. Rice flour is the most ubiquitous.
You see it everywhere.
You do. It provides excellent structural integrity, but if you rely on it too heavily, it imports a distinct, unpleasant grittiness.
Yeah, it's like chewing on microscopic grains of sand. Why is that?
Well, because standard rice flour is often milled too coarsely, meaning the individual particle size remains large.
Oh, I see.
When those large particles refuse to hydrate quickly, they maintain that hard, granular structure right through the baking process.
Got it.
Then you have almond flour, which brings fat, moisture, and a rich, nutty flavor. But as heavy, right? It lacks any inherent binding capability.
Just the bulk.
Exactly. And then there's coconut flour, which is a completely different beast. It is highly, almost aggressively absorbent.
Oh, I learned that the hard way. It acts like a sponge on steroids.
It really does. Because of its incredibly high insoluble fiber content, it doesn't just sit in your liquid ingredients. It actively hunts for water molecules, pulling them in and locking them down.
It's thirsty.
Very. If you use it, you have to drastically increase your hydration, and you must use it sparingly, or your bake will be bone dry.
Okay, so the flours are our aggregate. What about the cement, the starches?
Starches modify the crumb. They smooth out the texture and fill the gaps between those larger flour particles we just talked about.
Like the rice flour.
Right. Potato starch, for instance, is brilliant for creating lightness, airiness, and a delicate crumb. But we have to make a vital distinction here for the intermediate baker.
This is crucial.
It is. Potato starch is emphatically not the same thing as potato flour.
Right, potato flour is heavy, dense, and tastes overwhelmingly like mashed potatoes.
Exactly. Potato starch is a fine, neutral white powder that just provides lift.
So do not confuse the two.
Precisely. And then you have tapioca starch or cornstarch. These add necessary chewiness.
Oh, that bendiness.
Yeah, they act as a gelatinous binder when heated, giving your cookie that satisfying bend before it snaps.
Nice.
But even with the perfect mix of bulk flours and smoothing starches, you still completely lack tensile strength. You lack the elasticity of gluten.
Which brings us to the rebar of our concrete analogy, the gums, specifically xanthan gum.
Xanthan gum is the great equalizer. It is an extracellular polysaccharide that, when hydrated, creates a highly flexible, sticky matrix.
So it's the fake gluten.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It mimics the stretchy balloon-like structure of gluten, trapping the air bubbles created by your leavening agents and holding the whole structure together as it expands in the oven.
Now, there is a very specific golden ratio for a foundational homemade flour blend that I see referenced constantly by top bakers in our guide.
The Holy Grail blend.
Yes. It is 40% white rice flour, 30% tapioca starch, 20% potato starch, and 10% almond flour.
A perfect balance.
Right. And then you add about a half teaspoon of xanthan gum per cup of that blend if your specific recipe requires structural support.
Exactly.
I love this ratio because it perfectly balances the concrete. You have the rice flour for the hard aggregate, the potato starch for the light cement, the tapioca for the flexible chew, and the almond flour for fat.
It covers all the bases.
But I do have a question about our rebar. If xanthan gum acts as the gluten, the literal steel holding my structure together, why not get heavy-handed with it? Like, why not add a whole tablespoon? More strength is better.
Oh, that is the exact trap intermediate bakers fall into. You assume more rebar means a stronger house.
It makes sense logically.
It does, but it goes much deeper than just strength. It completely alters the internal mechanics of the crumb. If you use excessive xanthan gum, it doesn't just add structure, it turns the matrix into a viscoelastic trap.
A viscoelastic trap, that sounds intense.
It is. It binds the water so tightly that steam cannot efficiently escape during the baking process.
Wait, so it traps the moisture inside permanently?
Yes. And the result is a dense, overly gummy, almost slimy mouthfeel.
Ugh, gross.
Yeah, it will turn a beautiful loaf of bread into a heavy, rubbery brick. A little goes a very, very long way. Precision is everything.
Okay, so mastering that 40-30-20-10 foundational blend gives us a great baseline. But if you look at what cutting-edge gluten-free bakeries are doing right now, the real magic involves pushing way past that basic architecture.
Oh, absolutely. We're getting into some highly unexpected chemistry now.
Right, at the modern trends.
They're truly fascinating. We are seeing a massive resurgence in the use of ancient grains as the primary aggregate. Grains like teff, sorghum, and millet.
Okay, but what do those bring to the table that rice flour doesn't?
Complexity. Rice flour is essentially a blank canvas. Teff brings a rich, malty, almost molasses-like depth, which is incredible for chocolate cakes or dark breads.
Oh, wow.
And sorghum provides a sweet, mild earthiness that perfectly mimics traditional whole wheat. These grains aren't just alternatives. They offer sophisticated flavor compounds that standard white wheat flour simply cannot compete with.
So it's actually an upgrade in flavor.
Exactly. We are also seeing a huge crossover with vegan baking techniques.
Right, managing two dietary restrictions simultaneously, like using a flax egg, which is just ground flaxseed hydrated in water, or aquafaba, the viscous liquid whipped out of a can of chickpeas.
Yep, the chickpea water.
But since you don't have the gluten structure, how do those vegan minders behave differently?
Well, in a traditional baking matrix, real egg proteins coagulate under heat to form a rigid structure.
They firm up?
Right. But in a gluten-free matrix, you are already lacking structure. So when you use a flax egg, you are relying entirely on the mucilage in the flaxseed to form a gel that mimics that protein coagulation. It's a delicate chemical dance.
That makes sense. But the two secret weapons that really blew my mind in the sources were psyllium husk powder and apple cider vinegar.
Ah, the heavy hitters.
Now, the psyllium husk I somewhat understand mechanically. It improves texture, adds much-needed soluble fiber, and creates a highly flexible bread-like crumb that xanthan gum alone just can't achieve.
Exactly. It's fantastic.
But apple cider vinegar, here's where it gets really interesting, but also where I am super skeptical. I want a beautiful banana bread, not a loaf that tastes like a vinaigrette salad dressing.
I get it. It sounds alarming to add pungent acid to a sweet bake, I know.
Oh.
But this is where you have to trust the science, not your palate.
Okay, convince me.
You aren't adding the vinegar for flavor. You are introducing a highly specific, rapid chemical reaction. Remember, without that stretchy balloon of gluten, you are fighting a massive uphill mechanical battle to get your dough to rise and stay fluffy.
Because the air just escapes through the weak crumb before it can set.
Exactly. So you need a robust, immediate, and violent release of carbon dioxide to literally force the dough upward against gravity.
A violent release.
Yes. When the acetic acid in the apple cider vinegar reacts with the sodium bicarbonate, the baking soda in your recipe, it triggers that rapid gas release. This provides essential immediate lift, dramatically improving the overall crumb and openness of the bake.
Okay, that sounds great mechanically, but what happens to the vinegar taste? I still don't want a sour muffin.
It vanishes.
Completely.
Completely. Because the acetic acid reacts so completely with the alkaline baking soda, they neutralize each other. Whatever trace volatile compounds remain simply evaporate in the heat of the oven.
So it's an invisible catalyst.
That's a perfect way to describe it. It does its heavy lifting in the first 5 minutes of baking and then leaves absolutely no flavor trace behind.
That makes total sense. It's like a chemical booster rocket.
Yep.
But, you can have all the right rebar, the perfect ancient grain aggregates, and invisible catalysts like vinegar, and still fail.
Oh, easily.
Because the final hurdle between a decent bake and an absolute triumph comes down entirely to technique. It's about how you handle the dough.
Technique is arguably the single most critical variable. You can source the most expensive, perfectly milled teff flour in the world, but if your methodology is flawed, the chemistry simply will not engage.
So let's break down the essential best practices for you, the intermediate baker. And it starts with precision.
Uncompromising precision. Moving from volume measurements like scooping with cups to mass measurements using a digital kitchen scale is completely non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable, because a cup of almond flour isn't always the same amount of almond flour.
Exactly. Depending on how tightly it was packed in the bag, or even the ambient humidity in your kitchen on that specific day, a volume cup of almond flour can vary in weight by up to 20%.
20%, that's huge.
It's massive. In a delicate gluten-free matrix, a 20% variance in dry bulk will instantly destroy your hydration ratio.
Okay, so step 1, buy a digital scale. Zero it out. Weigh in grams. Got it. What about temperature and the mixing process itself?
Temperature control dictates emulsification. Your wet ingredients, eggs, butter, milk, must be brought to room temperature before you begin.
What happens if they aren't?
If you pour cold milk into room temperature butter, the butter seizes, breaking the emulsion. You need a smooth, stable batter that can hold on to those delicate carbon dioxide bubbles we just created with our vinegar.
Keeping the bubbles safe.
Exactly. And once you begin mixing, you must avoid overmixing at all costs.
Wait, I have to stop you there. In traditional wheat baking, you knead and mix the dough aggressively, specifically to develop the gluten network.
Right, to build strength.
Yeah. So if we have absolutely no gluten in our bowl, why is overmixing dangerous? What are we hurting?
You are hurting the starches.
The cement?
Yes, the cement. This is a microscopic mechanical issue. The tapioca and potato starches we added are delicate. When you aggressively and continuously mechanically shear a hydrated starch granule with a mixer, it literally tears open.
Oh, wow. It breaks them.
It does. It spills its internal component, called amylose, directly into your batter. This transforms what should be a delicate structural cement into an unpalatable, gluey, cohesive paste.
That sounds awful.
It is. You must mix only until the ingredients are homogeneously combined, and then stop immediately.
Okay, so precision scaling, room temperature emulsification, and gentle mixing.
Yep.
But then there is a step that I guarantee almost everyone skips, hydration. The source material emphasizes that the dough must rest for 15 to 30 minutes before it ever sees the inside of an oven.
It is so crucial.
So what does this actually mean? Is resting the dough essentially like letting a dry sponge sit in a shallow dish of water? Like if you try to use it immediately, the sponge is stiff and abrasive, but if you give it 20 minutes, it plumps up and softens.
That's close, but it's actually much more active and dynamic than a passive sponge.
Okay, how so?
Well, starches and gums aren't just holding water in their pores, they are chemically binding to it. They are swelling up and changing their cellular structure entirely. Gluten-free flours, especially rice and ancient grains, absorb liquid at a much slower rate than traditional wheat.
So if you skip the resting period, you are essentially throwing raw, unhydrated flour into a hot oven.
Yes. And the heat immediately evaporates the ambient moisture before the flour can absorb it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that is exactly the mechanism that leads to the classic gluten-free mistake. A dry, gritty, crumbly bake that falls apart in your hands.
The dusty muffin from the dark ages.
Exactly. Giving the batter that 15 to 30 minutes on the counter allows the chemical binding to complete before the heat of the oven locks the final structure in place.
Just let the chemistry happen.
Give it time.
And speaking of locking the structure in place, the cooling process is just as strict.
It is the final test of your patience. Baked goods must cool completely on a wire rack before you even attempt to slice them.
But warm bread fresh out of the oven is like the best part of baking.
I know it is, but in gluten-free baking, the cooking process doesn't stop when you take it out of the oven.
It's still going.
Yes. Because there is no strong gluten network holding the crumb together, the starches are the only thing keeping the loaf from collapsing. When the bread comes out, those starches are still hot and gelatinous.
So they're unstable.
Very. They need time to retrograde, to cool down, set, and firm up into a solid structure. If you cut into a gluten-free loaf while it's hot, you release the trapped steam prematurely, the fragile starch network instantly collapses, and you are left with a gummy, dense, ruined crumb.
Patience is truly a virtue, or in this case, a literal structural requirement.
Absolutely.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on one advanced technique from the guide that completely changes the game regarding that moisture issue we were just talking about, the Tangzhong method.
Ah, yes, the Tangzhong. This is where we see brilliant global techniques being co-opted to solve gluten-free problems.
It's Japanese, right?
Originally an Asian technique, yes, heavily popularized in Japanese milk bread, designed to create incredibly soft, fluffy, long-lasting loaves.
How does it work?
It involves taking a small portion of your flour blend and physically cooking it on the stove with a liquid, usually water or milk, until it forms a thick, translucent, gel-like paste.
And then you just fold that cooled paste into your main dough. How does that stop the bread from being dry?
It comes back to gelatinization at a microscopic level. By applying direct, sustained heat to that portion of starch and liquid, you permanently alter the shape of the starch molecule.
You're forcing it to change.
Right. It uncoils and expands, allowing it to trap and hold on to exponentially more moisture than it ever could if you just mixed it in cold.
So basically preloads the dough with locked-in hydration.
Exactly. In the context of gluten-free baking, where rapid scaling and dryness are your ultimate enemies, the Tangzhong method is a revelation.
It fights the stale brick effect.
It does. It yields a bread that stays soft, pliable, and tender for days on the counter, rather than turning into a crumbly brick overnight.
It is so incredibly cool how we can borrow a technique meant for the softest Japanese wheat bread and apply it to a gluten-free loaf to solve a highly specific chemical problem.
Baking is amazing like that.
It really is. So let's quickly recap this journey we've been on. We started by looking at Willem-Karel Dicke finally identifying gluten as the medical culprit in the mid-20th century, which, accidentally plunged bakers into an architectural dark age.
Right. And then we decoded how to rebuild that architecture using the concrete analogy, balancing the aggregate of ancient flours, the smoothing cement of starches, and the vital but delicate rebar of xanthan gum.
We unlocked the chemical magic of using apple cider vinegar as an invisible catalyst to violently lift the dough.
A booster rocket.
Exactly. And we learned the absolute necessity of patience and technique, weighing your ingredients in grams, preventing amylose release by not overmixing, letting that dough rest so the starches can chemically bind, and maybe even experimenting with pre-gelatinizing using the Tangzhong method.
It is a remarkable, deeply satisfying synthesis of history, chemistry, and technique.
It really is.
And I'd just like to leave you with a final, broader thought to ponder.
Let's hear it.
As we continue to refine these methodologies, as we unlock the incredible nuanced flavor potentials of ancient grains like teff, sorghum, and millet, and as we truly master these complex hydration techniques, we are shifting the entire culinary paradigm.
How so?
Well, we might be rapidly approaching a future where gluten-free baking isn't just viewed as a dietary alternative or a medical necessity. It might become the gold standard.
Wow. The gold standard.
Yeah, it might be sought out by everyone, regardless of dietary restriction, simply because the complex flavor profiles and the engineered delicate textures are objectively superior to standard, everyday wheat baking.
I love that idea, that the alternative actually becomes the undisputed champion because it is just chemically and flavorfully better.
It's very possible.
So for everyone listening, I enthusiastically encourage you to put this deep science to the test. Don't just absorb the theory, get into the kitchen and execute it.
Absolutely. Go bake something.
Pick a recipe from the guide. Maybe try your hand at some classic chocolate chip cookies. Or test out that hydration theory on a crispy gluten-free pizza dough. Buy that digital scale, weigh your ingredients in grams, let that dough rest, and then share your masterpiece.
You'd love to see it.
We want to see what you engineer, so post it on social media and use the hashtag Gluten-Free Baking Triumph, because we've come a long, long way from the days of the crumbly doorstop, and it is absolutely time to celebrate that triumph.